Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today at Statistics Solutions. My name is Justin D'Souza. I'm a quantitative specialist here at the company. Today, we are going to discuss general tips to fast-track the methodology process, specifically for quantitative studies. I'm going to go through the entire presentation first, and if you have any questions, you can type those into the chat box. My colleague Sierra is going to be adding some hyperlinks about our company, and some web links to schedule consultations. If you have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A box or the chat box. And we will be sending everyone a copy of the recording as well as a copy of the webinar. All right, I'll give a brief overview on the services that our company provides. Then we'll dive into the topic today about really expediting the process for a quantitative methodology. So we'll discuss committee communication, planning, timeframes, templates. We'll look at some methodology specifics, and we will conclude with a summary. On this slide, you can see all the different components of the dissertation that our company assists with. So we have methodologists, both quantitative and qualitative, and we have literature review specialists. We can assist with every part of the dissertation, chapters 1 through 5 conventionally. And we can help you frame research questions, determine a gap in the literature, identify potential instrumentation that you can use or potentially archival data. We can host a survey for you on SurveyMonkey, and we assist with the actual interpretation and crunching of the numbers for the results chapter, and we can present an APA write-up for you. And then we assist with the discussion chapter, PowerPoints for both proposal and final defenses, and journal publications. If you have any questions, you can give us a call at 727-442-4290. So the first component I want to discuss is planning for the dissertation. I think it's important very early on to identify the ultimate goals for research. Are you trying to make a significant breakthrough in your field or industry? Or are you trying to get through this process as efficiently and effectively as possible? Now, it's unfortunate, but the truth is that colleges don't really care how long it takes for you to complete the dissertation, especially the online universities, I would say. The goal, I shouldn't say the goal, but they don't bat an eyelid if it's going to take you years to complete, because that means you're paying tuition or extra time. So the goal, I would say, is to try and get through this as efficiently as possible. Pick a simple topic, pick kind of straightforward research questions and analyses, and save the more important work for after the dissertation. If you want to benefit your field or your industry, work in a journal publication after the dissertation, as this is less time consuming and it's less expensive. So first, establish a time frame in which you want to complete each section of the paper. So this is going to involve, discussing with your committee, how do they want you to work on the chapters? Do they want you to work on them one at a time? Or do you need to write the entire proposal first, such as the introduction, lit review, and methodology? Do they want it in piecemeal, or do they want one chapter, or do they want the whole proposal at once? Every committee is different. You have to keep in mind that some chairs and methodologists have 30 different students. So you have to work within their timeframes, but establish a time frame that works best for them so you can expedite this process. So you'll want to follow the school's template and checklist for each chapter. Every school has different requirements. As I said before, going to the previous slide, most universities follow this template of introduction, lit review, and methodology. But I have seen some deviations. Sometimes the intro and lit review are combined and the methodology is a specific chapter. Sometimes the IRB process will happen early on as opposed to after the methodology. So really establish the timeframes. Then you can look for previously approved papers at your school so you can understand what is expected. And you can ask for approved papers from your chair and methodologists that they have worked on. So then you can see exactly, what they're looking for. It gives you a template to follow. You can see the type of organization you need to follow, the type of writing, and the type of research questions. How rigorous does the study need to be? Then you will have committee approval. So assuming you get through chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then the paper usually proceeds to a more formal review, which is the URR or the AQR. Different universities have different terminology for this, but this is the higher up at the university, and they're going to look at the paper with a fine-tooth comb. This is usually the step that a lot of students experience some roadblocks. So you want to establish a connection with this member, the URR or the AQR, and identify how they typically review papers. Look for a paper at your school that they have approved as well, and be prepared to communicate with these two people. The final advice I have on this slide is to use screen share softwares. If you're ever going through committee reviews and your committee gives you feedback, use Zoom, GoToMeeting, or Google Meet. Just a few examples, as you can screen share. You can look at the paper together at the same time. You can provide feedback. You can record the meeting and go back to it at a future date. It's really useful. I use it every day at this job as I'm dealing with statistics, and a lot of it is explaining things visually. I'm a visual learner and I'm a visual teacher. So I think the same principles would apply when you're working on your dissertation. Have the paper in front of you, so you can write notes and your committee can see and pinpoint exactly where the feedback applies. Now diving into some methodology specifics. So kind of topic development stage, you want to create at least 2 research questions if you're doing a quantitative study. And this usually involves picking at least 2 to 3 variables of interest. The most common research questions are crafted and phrased in this way. Is there a significant relationship between X and Y? And I have some examples here. And then is there a significant difference in Y between the groups of X? So the first research question will usually involve running correlations. If you see the word predictive, that's probably a regression model. Whereas RQ2, when you see differences, that's going to imply running t-tests or an ANOVA potentially. And usually 2 research questions are enough. Some universities require 3. I've seen some even require only 1. But I think 2 is the sweet spot. You can view our previous webinar that I did on constructing quantitative research questions. I kind of go in depth based on what design you're picking. A causal comparative design, correlational design, longitudinal design, experimental. I go through every example and kind of identify what is the analysis you can use to address those questions. Then we get into the data collection plan. So you want to select either a survey approach, meaning a self-report survey, or use archival data. Try not to use both data collection approaches, as it can be very difficult to merge survey data with archival data. So either select a self-report survey, a leadership questionnaire, job satisfaction survey, self-efficacy, or look for an online archival database, hospital records or grades for high school or college, things like that. I say don't use both because say you collect test grades or test scores for in archival data, but then you need to take those same students and administer a leadership survey with them. Very difficult to pinpoint and match students, especially because archival data is usually de-identified. You can't look at an email address or a phone number or a name. It's usually a code. So it's difficult to merge and combine archival with survey data. Surveys, I kind of touched on this already, but surveys involve identifying a sample that the participants then need to complete a self-report questionnaire, whereas archival data, also called secondary data, corresponds to data that's already been collected in a database. This is usually found online. Then you want to run a power analysis. As soon as your research questions are set in stone, you run a power analysis to determine what is the minimum sample size requirement. What is the target sample size I need to provide validity to my findings? Once you run that power analysis, and I put the hyperlink right here, this is for GPower. The GPower is a free statistical software tool. I believe it's a German company that developed it, but you can see if you scroll down about a quarter of the way, here is the download link for Windows and Mac. So for instance, this is what GPower looks like. And the sample size is going to be based on what analysis you're planning to run. To say we're doing a linear regression, okay? So linear multiple regression. And usually you change the power to 0.8. We do have webinars on power analyses as well, and we go more in depth. Just to illustrate today, the more predictors you add, the larger your sample size requirement will be. To say we have 5 predictors and click calculate, the minimum sample size for this will be 92 participants. So that's really the target that we're aiming for. And you can see if I increase this to 7 predictors, it goes up to 103 participants. So the more predictors you add, generally the more variables you have, even if you're doing a MANOVA or an ANOVA, the more variables and groups you add, the larger your sample size will be. But sometimes this isn't enough. 103, you have to account for attrition and people not completing the survey. Assume that some people are going to have to be removed because they did not complete the survey. So typically I see a 15% correction applied. So if I multiply 103 by 1.15 and then round up, I would target 119 as a minimum for this. So keep that 15% attrition rate in mind when you're doing the power analysis. Okay, so then you want to determine if it's even feasible to target sample size. Say 119 is too much, then you need to discuss with your committee. Due to COVID-19, I've seen a lot of studies be underpowered and they're not reaching their sample size minimum, and that's okay, it happens. It can be acknowledged as a limitation in your final chapters, but if you're not even close, if you're not in the ballpark of getting sample size target, then you'll want to try changing your research questions potentially and making it a smaller requirement. Okay, so that's what I talked about in the second bullet point here. You might have to change the research questions to be more simplistic so you can obtain a smaller sample, or as I said in the final chapters, interpret with a level of caution. The statistical analyses will be underpowered. Okay, so then, a lot of students today are using SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics to target participants. So you can give SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics specific criteria, location in the US, job type, income type, socioeconomic status, race. You can put as many criteria as you want, and these companies will target participants for you, and they charge per response. The more criteria that you add, the more expensive it is. Qualtrics is in general more expensive than SurveyMonkey, but Qualtrics has excellent customer support. You can always speak to someone on the phone. SurveyMonkey, in my experience, is great, but it's a little more emailing back and forth, and it's difficult to speak with someone on the phone. All right, if you're using a self-report survey, strongly look for a instrument that's been previously validated. I strongly recommend that because it's going to avoid you having to create your own survey. This just adds months to the process. You have to do a pilot study. You have to gather a panel of experts to ensure that the survey is asking proper questions. You have to establish reliability and validity. It's the headache of a process. I would do that for a journal publication potentially, but not for a dissertation. So when you do look for a self-report survey, these are the types of bullet points that you need to look for. You need to look for the number of items that consist of the survey. Does it use a Likert scale or a multiple choice format? What does the Likert scale range from? Does the survey measure an overall scale, or does it measure subscales? For instance, the MLQ for leadership measures transformational leadership, transactional leadership, and laissez-faire. It measures subscales, but it doesn't have an overall leadership measure. Whereas something like the JSS, the job satisfaction survey, that just measures job satisfaction collectively. It does not have subscales. You'll have to figure out specifically what are you going to use. Are you going to use the overall scale or the subscales or both? Then you need to support the reliability and validity of your instrument. And you can use Cronbach alpha for this. This is the most popular measure for internal consistency. And there are also factor analyses, okay? EFAs and CFAs, these are used for validity. So when you're doing searches, you try and identify these two components, reliability and validity. If you're using archival data, it can be a little more tricky to establish reliability and validity because it is secondary data. It just exists. Many times there are not quality checks for this, but if you can identify if the data has been double checked or if it's been verified for accuracy. Then jumping into crunching the numbers. Okay, if we're still in the methodology, there's usually a section called the data analysis plan. And this is where you first identify the software that you're going to be using. Most frequently, I see SPSS used among students. SAS is a popular one as well. We have our own company software called Intellected Statistics that can crunch your numbers, it can clean the data, and provide an APA write-up for you. Then you want to discuss how you're going to handle non-responses. So going back to that attrition point when I did a power analysis, you want to remove participants potentially if they don't complete the survey or if they don't complete majority of the survey. If participants miss an item here and there, then you can consider imputation, which is going to predict missing responses, or you can replace the missing columns or the missing cells with an average. So that's called mean replacement or median replacement. So just swapping missing values with the mean. That's also a pretty common procedure. If you're using an online survey, or even if you're doing a paper format survey, you can try to make every survey question mandatory. Some IRBs have a problem with this as they like the voluntary nature of the survey to be kept intact. But I would try this because it really makes the analysis process easier if you don't have to deal with any missing responses. So try to make every survey question mandatory and see if the IRB is on board. Then you usually use descriptive statistics to summarize the demographics, gender, age, ethnicity, and your variables of interest. Then you jump into each research question. To address research question 1, I plan to use a blank, whether that's a regression, t-test, ANOVA. For every question, specifically note what is the analysis you're going to use. Discuss what are the independent and dependent variables in the analysis, and what is the level of measurement for those? Are they nominal, ordinal, or continuous? Then you need to discuss the assumptions that are going to be checked prior to analysis. So many parametric analyses, even non-parametric analyses, require things to be supported. Prerequisites like normality, homogeneity of variance, homoscedasticity, linearity. So take a look at what assumptions you need to verify. Then discuss the process for interpreting the findings. You can use a very popular website today, Statistics Layered, for a breakdown of what assumptions to check. So just to illustrate that, you can just type, if you're doing a t-test, independent t-test, put in Google Statistics Layered, independent t-test, website, And then if you scroll down, first of all, it gives you a breakdown on what a t-test is and how to run it. And then it goes into the assumptions that you should verify. So some of them are definition based. Your dependent variable needs to be continuous. If you're running a t-test, you need to have 2 independent groups. You need independence of observations, just meaning that participants can't be in multiple groups. They discretely fall into one group. No significant outliers. One of the more important ones here is having a normal distribution for the variables of interest and homogeneity of variance. So usually you need to discuss all the assumptions in the methodology that you're going to check once you're crunching the numbers. Okay, so data analysis plan, we covered everything here. So in summary, you want to maintain consistent communication with your committee, establish timeframes that work for them. Keep in mind that they have other students that they are working with. So try to find a consistent schedule that you can work with them. Use Zoom, use Zoom and Google Meet and GoToMeeting to look at the paper together when you're discussing feedback. And you can record those meetings, which I think is really useful to go back and listen to really the fine points of the conversation. Follow the school template and guidelines. Ask for approved papers from your school and approved papers from your committee and the higher ups, the AQR and the URR. See if they can provide approved papers to you, which will give you a template to follow. Aim for at least 3 variables of interest and at least 2 research questions. Select either a survey approach or archival data approach. Try not to use both. Run a power analysis to pinpoint the minimum sample size and determine whether the sample size is feasible. If you're having trouble collecting data on your own, consider using SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics for the data collection process, as you can provide criteria to them and they will then target participants and charge you per response. If you're using a self-report survey, you need to identify, does it have scales, subscales, overall scores? How do you score it? Do you take an average of items? Do you take a sum? Or is it some other method? I've seen even multiplication is used sometimes. Then you need to provide reliability and validity information. As I said, Cronbach alpha is a big one for internal consistency and reliability. Validity, you can provide EFA and CFA results. And then you need to have a plan for analysis once you develop the research questions. Go through each research question and be very specific as to what is the approach you're going to use. What are the independent and dependent variables? What are the assumptions you're going to check? And how are the data going to be interpreted? Okay, so I'll now do a Q&A session. If you have any questions, you can type those into the chat box. I did see some participants joined a little bit later. So if you'd like me to go back to any particular slides, we're going to send a copy of the PowerPoint and the webinar. But if you do have any questions and you want me to review something again, just let me know. Okay, and it looks like Sierra provided some hyperlinks in the chat box as well for free dissertation resources, an archive of our webinars that we've done in the past, and some self-schedule links. Okay, so any specific questions about the methodology, about what analysis to run, power analyses, instrumentation? Abdul, let me put the links in again. Ira might beat me to it. Here we go. I just put it in again. All right, it's good to see some familiar names coming back to these webinars. I'm glad to see that. Hi, Viva. Yes, this was primarily for quantitative studies, but some of the same, the early slides apply to quant or qual. Okay, so first off, I talked about identifying goals for the dissertation, try to get through this process as efficiently as possible, save the big field changing or industry changing studies for a journal publication, identify timeframes with your committee. But we're going to send a copy of the recording so you can take a look at the early slides again. I then kind of jump into specifically quantitative methodology. Hey, Abdul, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Where can we find the information? Are you talking about this presentation? It's going to be emailed to you, most likely tomorrow. Eva, did you have any specific questions about quantitative studies? Are you doing a qualitative? Gotcha. Okay, yeah, we're doing, let me take a look at the upcoming webinars. I'm sure we're doing a qualitative one as well. Okay, this is one of the links that Sierra provided. And you'll see, you can go to, this is the webinar archive. So you can view recordings that we've done in the past. But here's one we did, I think this was, it was last month on the 13th, Mastering Your Qualitative Methodology. So you might want to just scroll through these qualitative results, and I'm sure there's probably a presentation that will be beneficial. And then you can also see what's on the horizon if you go to webinars, upcoming webinars. We're doing another qualitative methodology one next Friday. Abdul, do you have any specific questions? Okay, SPSS, you might want to schedule with Janine. So you'll see the schedule a consultation link. You can speak with Janine or Brittany, and they will guide you in the right direction. They'll assign a statistician to you, and we can help address any questions you have about SPSS. Yep, you can see the link at the bottom of the chat box. Sierra just put it. So you can schedule a link and they'll discuss where you need help, and then they'll provide a statistician to you in which they can do a Zoom meeting just like this, and we can address your questions. Yep, you're welcome. Do we have any other questions? All right, well, thanks for joining, everyone. Let's see the next one I'm doing. It's going to be a couple weeks from now, but I'm going to be doing a defense preparation webinar early August, and we do up to 16 of these. I might be overestimating, 12 to 16 of these every month. And we touch on every point of the dissertation. So come join us again if you do have any questions. Have a great day.